The cameras were rolling live when Dolly Parton said, "I wrote this song for Winnie and Frances," and Jimmy Fallon froze. It was a Tuesday night taping of The Tonight Show. Standard format. Dolly Parton was the musical guest, always a ratings winner, always a crowd favorite. She'd been on the show dozens of times over the years. Jimmy loved having her. The audience loved her. These appearances were easy, warm, predictable in the best way. Dolly had just finished talking about her latest album. The conversation had been light, full of laughter. She told the story about her goddaughter, Miley Cyrus, that had the studio howling. Jimmy was in his element, relaxed, grinning, hitting all his marks. Then Dolly reached down beside her chair and picked up an acoustic guitar that had been resting there the whole interview. Jimmy's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't in the notes. His producers Hannon mentioned a performance during the interview segment. Musical guests performed later in their own segment. But Dolly was Dolly. She did what she wanted, and everyone was better for it. "Well," Dolly said, settling the guitar across her lap, her ringed fingers finding the strings with practice ease. "I know we weren't planning this, but I brought something special tonight." Jimmy leaned forward, intrigued. "You're going to play something right now." "I am," Dolly said, and her smile shifted, still warm, but deeper somehow, more intentional. "I wrote a song, Jimmy, and I want you to hear it first." The studio audience murmured with excitement. The Roots exchanged glances. Questlove leaned forward on his drum stool. This was the magic of live television. The moments you couldn't script. Jimmy spread his hands. "Well, we would be honored. Please." Dolly adjusted the guitar, checked the tuning with a few soft plucks. Then she looked directly at Jimmy, and her expression carried something he couldn't quite read. Tenderness maybe, or the kind of knowing affection an aunt has for a favorite nephew. "I wrote this song for Winnie and Frances," she said. Jimmy's smile flickered. His hands, which had been resting casually on his desk, went completely still. Winnie and Frances, his daughters, his 6-year-old and 8-year-old girls, who were probably asleep right now in their beds across town, who had no idea their father was sitting on live television about to hear something he didn't understand yet. "You what?" Jimmy's voice came out quieter than usual. "For your girls," Dolly said simply. "I wrote them a song." The audience went silent. Not the anticipatory silence before a performance. The confused, breath silence of people who sense something significant is happening, but don't yet know what. Jimmy stared at Dolly. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His producer's voice was probably screaming in his earpiece, but he didn't seem to hear it. The cameras held steady on his face, catching the exact moment when a professional entertainer became just a father, confused and overwhelmed. "Dolly, I don't. When did you?" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Just listen, honey," Dolly said gently, and she began to play. The melody was simple, the kind of tune that sounded like it had existed forever, like you'd heard it in a dream once. Dolly's voice, that crystalline, ageless instrument, filled the studio, little lights in the window, little stars in the sky, little hearts full of wonder, little souls learning to fly. Jimmy's hand moved slowly to cover his mouth. His eyes were already wet. The song continued. It wasn't long, maybe 2.5 minutes, but every line was specific, personal, and possible. Dolly sang about bedtime stories and scraped knees, about giggling at the dinner table and dancing in the kitchen, about a father who made funny voices and stayed up late worrying, about 2 little girls who didn't know yet how much they were loved, but would understand someday. How did Dolly know these things? How did she know about the specific way Winnie laughed? About Frances's obsession with drawing horses? About the bedtime routine Jimmy did every single night he was home? The silly song he made up that only his family knew. The audience was crying, not politely dabbing eyes, actually crying. The Roots had completely stopped pretending to work. Questlove had his hand over his heart. Tar was wiping his face with his sleeve. And Jimmy Fallon, who made millions of people laugh every night, who had interviewed presidents and movie stars and musicians, who had built a career on quick wit and boundless energy, sat completely motionless with tears streaming down his face. Dolly sang the final verse. "So when the world gets heavy and the nights get long, remember someone loved you enough to write you this song." She strummed the final chord and let it ring out into silence. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Jimmy couldn't speak. His chest was heaving with the effort of keeping himself together on live television. His hands were shaking. Dolly set the guitar down carefully and looked at him with infinite gentleness. "Jimmy," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He nodded, not trusting his voice. "About 6 months ago," Dolly continued, I got a letter from Nancy, Jimmy's wife. Jimmy's brain was trying to process this information, but couldn't quite manage it. She wrote me a beautiful letter. Dolly said, she told me about your girls, about how much they mean to you, about how you try so hard to balance this job with being their daddy, about how sometimes you come home from tapings and cry because you miss their bedtime again. Jimmy's face crumpled. He pressed both hands against his eyes. She told me that you play them my music, Dolly continued, her own voice thickening with emotion. Now that you dance with them in the living room to Jolene, that Winnie asked if Dolly Parton was a real person or a character you made up. That Frances wants to learn guitar because Dolly plays guitar and she's magic. The audience was openly sobbing now. Someone in the front row was holding their friend's hand so tightly their knuckles were white. Nancy asked me. Dolly said if there was any way, any possible way I could do something special for your girls. She said she knew it was a lot to ask. That you'd never know. She reached out that she just wanted them to have something from me that was theirs. Jimmy lowered his hands. His face was wet, his eyes red, his expression completely raw. So, I wrote them a song, Dolly said simply. And I wanted you to hear it first before I record it, before anyone else hears it, because Nancy was right. You're a good daddy, Jimmy Fallon. And those little girls are lucky to have you. Jimmy tried to speak. Failed. Tried again. I don't. His voice cracked completely. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, honey. I didn't know. Nancy never told me. I had no idea you two had even. He stopped, overwhelmed again. Dolly smiled. That was the point. Some gifts are better as surprises. Jimmy stood up from his desk. It was awkward, unexpected, not something hosts did during interviews. But he walked around the desk and Dolly stood up from her chair and Jimmy Fallon hugged Dolly Parton on live television while an entire studio audience watched two legends become just two people sharing a moment of profound kindness. The hug lasted maybe 10 seconds. When they separated, Jimmy was laughing through his tears. That slightly hysterical laugh of someone emotionally overwhelmed. I'm a mess, he said, wiping his face with his hands. I'm completely destroyed. Good, Dolly said, patting his cheek. That means you're paying attention. Jimmy turned to the audience, spreading his arms helplessly. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm supposed to be professional, and he gestured at his tyraned face. The audience erupted in applause. Standing ovation, cheering, people calling out, "We love you, Jimmy." And that was beautiful. Jimmy turned back to Dolly. Can I ask you something? Of course, honey. Will you play it for them? For Winnie and Frances in person? Dolly's eyes sparkled. I was hoping you'd ask. Nancy and I already talked about it. How about this Saturday? Your place? I'll bring my guitar. Jimmy pressed his hand to his chest. Overcome again. They're going to lose their minds, Frances especially. She's going to actually lose her mind. Well, Dolly said with a wink. Let's make sure someone's recording it. The show went to commercial. During the break, Jimmy called Nancy. The producers let him take 5 minutes. He stood backstage, phone pressed to his ear, and said things the cameras didn't catch, but everyone could imagine. Thank you. I love you. How did you do this? You're incredible. I can't believe you. The girls. Oh my God. The girls. When they came back from commercial, Jimmy had composed himself slightly. He and Dolly finished the interview. Lighter topics, easier ground. But everyone watching knew what they'd witnessed. The performance would be clicked, shared, discussed. But it was that moment, that raw, unexpected gift that would be remembered. That Saturday, Dolly Parton showed up at Jimmy and Nancy Fallon's home in the Hamptons. She brought her guitar, a plate of homemade cookies, and 2 small rhinestone bracelets she'd picked out specifically for Winnie and Frances. The girls were speechless. Actually speechless. Frances burst into tears when Dolly walked through the door. Winnie grabbed her mother's leg and wouldn't let go for 10 full minutes. Dolly sat in the Fallons' living room and played Little Lights for 2 little girls who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Jimmy recorded it on his phone. Nancy cried. The girls sat cross-legged on the floor, staring up at Dolly Parton like she descended from heaven itself. When the song ended, Frances whispered, "Can you teach me?" "Teach you what, sweetheart?" "Guitar. So I can play this song, too." Dolly looked at Jimmy and Nancy. "You got an extra guitar in this house?" Jimmy practically ran to get his old acoustic from the closet. For the next hour, Dolly Parton gave Frances Fallon her first guitar lesson, showed her how to hold it, how to make AC chord, how to strum gently like you're petting a cat. Winnie sat next to her sister, watching intently, occasionally reaching out to touch Dolly's rhinestone jacket like she was checking to make sure this was real. Before she left, Dolly hugged both girls, told them to practice, told them their daddy loved them more than anything in the world, told them to be kind, work hard, and never let anyone tell them they were too much. At the door, she turned to Jimmy and Nancy. "Thank you for sharing them with me." "Thank you," Jimmy said. "Dolly, you just gave us a moment we'll carry forever." "Good," Dolly said, that knowing smile back on her face. "That's what music's for. That's what everything's for, really. Making moments that matter." She left. Jimmy closed the door, turned around, and saw his daughters, his little lights, still sitting in the living room. Frances holding the guitar, both of them glowing with the kind of joy that can't be manufactured or bought or earned. Only given. Nancy took his hand, squeezed it. "Did that really just happen?" Jimmy asked. "It really just happened. She wrote them a song. She wrote them a song." Jimmy sat down on the floor next to his daughters. Frances was trying to make the C chord Dolly had shown her, her small fingers struggling to stretch across the frets. Winnie was humming the melody of Little Lights, slightly off-key, but utterly sincere. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it because stories like this deserve to be heard. The song was never officially released. Dolly recorded it privately and gave the Fallon the only copy. It plays at every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every time the girls need reminding that they're loved. Years later, when Frances was asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said, "Someone who makes people feel the way Dolly made me feel that day." Jimmy still cries every time he hears that song. He plays it when he's on the road missing home. He played it at both girls' graduations from elementary school. He'll play it at their weddings someday. The recording from that Saturday in the Hamptons. Dolly teaching Frances her first guitar chords while Winnie Fallon sits in a locked drawer in Jimmy's office. He's watched it exactly 73 times. He'll never post it. Some moments aren't for the world. They're just for the people who live them. But that Tuesday night on The Tonight Show, when Dolly played a song written for two little girls who didn't even know it existed. That moment belongs to everyone who's ever been loved by someone who noticed, who paid attention, who cared enough to create something that would last. Nancy Fallon wrote one letter. Dolly Parton wrote one song. And somewhere in the space between those two acts of love, something eternal was made.